There are dietitians who are encouraging the consumption of cereals because they're funded by things like General Mills, you know? So it's very backwards world where, teens should be so upset. And that's how I felt. But I think that the light at the end of the tunnel is teens are very happy to be activists, like they want to see change. And I think that my generation uniquely has a desire for truth.
I connected with Grace Price and had the opportunity to hear about her documentary looking at how our dietary choices could play a role in helping to prevent cancer. She's only 18 years old and she started making the documentary at the age of 16. I feel like the work that she's doing to raise awareness of metabolic health is especially critical given the escalating crisis of conditions caused by metabolic dysfunction, both physical and psychiatric, in the youth. And in this discussion, we go over the making of her documentary, as well as her outlook on the youth mental health crisis and the exciting plans that she has for her future, which I am sure is incredibly bright. Talking to Grace gave me a lot of hope as she expressed optimism for the way her generation could be empowered with the right tools to reclaim their health and create a brighter future for themselves and the world at large. I hope you enjoy this interview with Grace Price.
Welcome to Metabolic Mind, a nonprofit initiative of Bazooki Group, transforming the study and treatment of mental disorders by exploring the connection between metabolism and brain health. Thank you for joining us on this journey.
Grace Price, I am so excited that you were able to carve out some time to join me today and share some information about your documentary, Cancer, Food Borne Illness. I am just so impressed with what you're accomplishing at such a young age. You have so much drive and ambition and are really bringing a lot of awareness to metabolic health. So I'm just so grateful you could be here. And I was wondering if you could start by kind of giving an overview summary of what your documentary is all about, as well as sharing a little bit about how the process unfolded and kind of how your perspective on cancer evolved through the making of this documentary.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. So my documentary started with me deciding that I wanted to find a way to cure cancer. This was what my high school project was going to be, and I was determined to see specifically if there was any way we could possibly cure cancer within the relationship between food and cancer. And so what kind of sparked this is I had lost a loved one to the disease, and that kind of introduced me to it for the first time, where I started asking myself a lot of questions like, well, if my grandpa got diagnosed with this so suddenly and then passed away even quicker, how do I know that's not going to happen to me in my lifetime? And as I started to ask these questions, what I found is there weren't that great of answers. Most doctors say things like, it's completely up to chance whether you get cancer, it's genetic, it's all about DNA mutations, you can't really control it, if you get stage 4 colon cancer, like bad luck of the draw. So I really got frustrated with these kind of subpar answers that it seemed everyone just kind of blindly believed without really knowing what was going on. So I decided that because I had a passion for biology, I wanted to do the research to see if I really could figure out a way to solve this disease. And what I ended up finding after a whole 2 years of basically traveling the country and interviewing experts in nutrition and oncology, and also just building my own audience on X, where I now have like 36,000 followers, but of just me summarizing these papers that I was reading and putting them out there, I've learned that the best way to cure cancer lies within prevention, and it's specifically prevention through eating the right foods and cutting out ultra-processed foods and excess sugars.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. And the documentary is very clear that you're bringing up this issue of prevention and that there are kind of lifestyle things that people can do that are pretty simple and straightforward to protect metabolic health and prevent cancer. And I'm just wondering, how did this realization make you feel? That's something that so many people are grappling with, trying to understand that it's a fairly simple answer. How did that make you feel, and why are you working so hard to raise awareness, especially for people of your generation?
Yeah, well, it's reading certain studies. Like one of my favorites was done on basically a ton of different fast food restaurants. They selected a large order of French fries that had been reheated and fried in cooking oil. And they measured the amount of acrolein in it, which is a toxin that is possibly carcinogenic and found abundantly in cigarette smoke. And they measured the amount in those French fries, and it was equivalent to about 25 cigarettes in one large thing of French fries. And so it's when I read things like that that I realize these foods are the new cigarettes of my generation. You know, we had lung cancer before where people were smoking all the time, and there was research that was coming up saying, you know, it seems like there's a connection between these new cancer cases and smoking, but doctors at the same time were promoting Camels, and you had the cigarette industry pushing back on all this research, you know, because they want to keep making profit. And I think that you can really draw a parallel now between that and what's happening today with big food conglomerates across America. I mean, I think we are in the fighting off the industry part of this kind of war on cancer, but it is definitely one that I feel is super timely because it's no longer a disease of old age either. Cancer cases in people under the age of 50, so early onset cancer, have increased by 80% in the past 3 decades. That's insane. Cancer incidences of colon cancer has increased more in people under the age of 50 than in people 65 plus. So it's increasingly becoming something that is hitting college students, and no one wants to hear that they're getting cancer, you know, and we have this epidemic that's coming. And so when people say, you're like, you know, why is this happening, Grace? I'm like, well, why don't we look at what has changed most significantly in our lifestyle in the past 30 or so years, you know? And it's just, it goes back to the food and metabolic health, like you and I were saying.
So having these realizations, how has that made you feel? I mean, overall, it can be very depressing to think about kind of profit motive, putting profit before people, and to dire consequences. So how does this make you feel? And what is there a sense of optimism that, you know, we can fight back against this profit motive, against big industry, big food, big pharma? How are we going to get this message out there? And what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, and that's a really great question, because I mean, it's completely disheartening and frustrating. I mean, my first thing is I'm like, every teen across America should be outraged by the fact that they have been played in this game of making profit based off of them being sick by these big food companies and big pharmaceutical companies. And so like, we are the target and the most profitable thing that they can go after. And no one's really speaking up about it. Adults are actually encouraging it. I mean, you see on TikTok, you know, there are dietitians who are encouraging the consumption of cereals because they're funded by things like General Mills, you know? So it's very backwards world where, teens should be so upset. And that's how I felt. But I think that the light at the end of the tunnel is teens are very happy to be activists, you know, like they want to see change. And I think that my generation uniquely has a desire for truth, and they want to find that. And they're just trying to figure out, you know, what's going on in this world. So my hope is that by targeting my generation and really telling them, like, guys, we've got to wake up to this fake food. Like the fact that we have been raised on this since we were babies, you know, the first thing we were given is baby formula, which the number one source of fat in that is polyunsaturated fats from vegetable oils that are oxidized and super harmful and cause chronic inflammation. So it's like from the day we were born, this is what we've been told was food. So it's rebuilding the idea of what is food, because it's not what we have been eating or what makes up greater than 60% of our daily caloric intake. It's not those ultra processed foods. But then after that, getting them excited about feeling good when you eat good food, because that's the greatest thing about, I personally am on the ketogenic diet, and I also have done, you know, just a low carb diet before that. And when you are running on ketones, I feel amazing. I feel so good. And I think that a lot of teens don't feel very great all the time, if I'm being honest. I think that's why we see them go home and scroll on TikTok and immediately grab a bag of Lay's, because they're just so nutrient deficient and longing for something that's going to give them a quick dopamine hit and then kind of move on to the next thing, you know? So it's a sad cycle, but I really do think we have the power to change it, and we can.
I love that so much, that overall you're coming away with this positive message and the framing that your generation are truth seekers. They're looking for solutions. They want to be empowered. Being in this field, I get very frustrated when you ever hear clinicians or anyone say that everybody just wants a pill and a quick fix and they're not willing to change diet and lifestyle. I'm not willing to believe that it's true. From firsthand experience, I've seen so many people find the right tools and transform their lives, and kind of getting your optimal physical and mental health is more valuable than anything. And I don't think we should ever assume that people aren't willing to make changes. So I love that. And actually, I had the opportunity to meet you briefly in Austin, where you live, because you took the time to come meet one of my heroes, Dr. Christopher Palmer. And I wanted to ask you, clearly you're a fan of his and interested kind of in this emerging field of metabolic psychiatry. And I was wondering, you mentioned kind of people feeling unwell too when they don't eat the right foods, and how, we can really enhance people's mental health through eating a proper diet. And I'm wondering what kind of parallels you see between your discoveries about cancer and the mental health crisis that we're seeing in the youth.
Yeah, I think that it's actually very much connected, because what's so fascinating about metabolic health and why it's like the first thing I stress when I talk to people is that metabolic health, that's basically our mitochondrial health. And our mitochondria, we have so many in all of our cells across our bodies, like there's so many of them. And people don't realize that when you have poor metabolic health, that basically means your body isn't creating energy properly. You have an entire energy imbalance when it comes to the production of that. And so it's going to impact your risk of these other diseases. And that seems kind of like common sense when you understand a little bit more about like cell biology and the reason why, our mitochondria are so important for metabolism. But it's just kind of mind-blowing where, I've done personal research on cancer being a metabolic disease and not a genetic disease. And I think that Dr. Thomas Seyfried has done incredible work in this field on the mitochondrial metabolic theory of cancer, which basically promotes the idea that Warburg started to research in the past. But it's that these cancerous cells, they form when you have dysfunctional mitochondria that then cause the cell to fall back on aerobic glycolysis, which is very strange. We normally only use like glycolysis and lactic acid fermentation when we're like working out in a hypoxic state, so we don't have enough oxygen in our cells. But it's very interesting how that is. And so what I love about Chris Palmer, he's amazing. He is just showing that, mental health isn't any different. Like when we loop all these diseases in, why do we leave out mental health? We're like, oh yeah, cancer, metabolic, type 2 diabetes, you can see how it's connected to metabolism. But then we treat mental health like it's completely in silos. And so I think that it's so important to realize that no, like our brain is a part of our body. Our brain takes 20% of our entire body's, total energy consumption. And so why would we think that the way that our body processes energy wouldn't impact our brain or the way that we feel, and all of these different disorders that are super prevalent in my generation, depression, anxiety, ADHD, all of them are off the walls. And I do think also like doctors probably over-diagnose these things as well. But when we look at all of the like metabolic issues we have, it makes sense because it's just the next thing that happens down the line of bad events that poor metabolic health causes, in my mind.
Yeah. When I look at the work that you're doing and just all of the incredible media attention and getting young people to talk about and think about these issues differently, really reminds me of Greta Thunberg and the work that she's done as an activist in the environmental space. And it makes me think, for your generation as well, you're facing so many issues when we talk about the environmental crisis and trying to work towards a more equitable world, addressing global poverty. There's so many huge issues that you guys have to face. And the thing that occurs to me is that if you have a population that is physically and mentally unwell, how are they going to have any fighting chance of addressing any of these huge issues that are so overwhelming to think about? So I really feel like Again, Greta Thunberg, great example of how one person can make a difference with that agency, creating a ripple effect, but really bringing people together to start a movement. So I really hope that what you're doing, raising awareness in the youth could create a larger movement, like you said, for truth seekers, for young people to get out there and say, we can see that metabolic dysfunction is a root cause of non-communicable disease. And there's something that we can do about it to take our mental, physical health back into our own hands. Um, so I'm wondering, how do you feel about the media attention? Last time I looked on Twitter, you were at over 4 million views. You've been on some big news channels. I'm wondering how you feel about the reception, what kind of responses you're getting, and how it makes you feel about potentially starting a movement and bringing larger visibility to this critical area.
Yeah, well, I think I've felt very overwhelmed with support surrounding the documentary, which I wasn't expecting. I actually thought that I was going to get a lot of hate. Just one, because I'm a teenager who's not a doctor nor a scientist. I'm a citizen scientist, but I don't have any credentials. I haven't finished high school yet. So I was like, I'm probably going to get some haters out there who are like, she doesn't know what she's talking about or whatever. But I also am talking about something that people get censored for when you go up against big food and stuff. So that's why it was so important to me that I released on X, because Elon has done such a good job promoting free speech on the platform that I wanted to make sure that this is the place where I feel I can get my message out. And I think that it'll get some traction because of that. And so I definitely think that I just feel very lucky that my message seems to resonate with people, and that people have been willing to take a chance on an 18-year-old who just has been doing her own research and created a documentary and wants to start a movement. And it motivates me to keep doing even more, because it's incredible the documentary reached 4 million, but I want even more people to be able to see it. And I want to reach more teens, which is why I'm building this app now, that I'm going to make specifically for teens. And the goal is that it will have features where, kind of like a nutrition coalition, but like a legit one that teens can all join. And they can, whether it's us boycotting a specific food because it has red dye, or writing a petition against Kellogg's, or if they want, there's going to be an AI feature where they can snapshot the food that they're eating, and it'll show them how many cigarettes it's equivalent to when you look at the toxicity of it and cancer risk. So there's going to be some really interesting features like that. And I'm just excited to keep sharing with people the things that have really changed my life that I've learned about the disease.
I love that you brought that up, that some of the things you've learned have changed your life. So what kind of things directly impacted your life, and how did it alter your behavior?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, all of them they've all altered my behavior, even in some cases where I used to be a huge lover of all bread. Every single day I was toast in the morning, then I had bread at lunch, then I had bread at dinner. Just too much carbs. But the minute that I started reading all this stuff about carbohydrates and learned more about metabolic health, and I was like, oh, I really do think I might be getting a little too much. And I was like, well, I think it's time for me to maybe think about altering this, because the science, it's so amazing what a lot of these scientists have discovered already. And a lot of science has existed for quite a while too, which is what's so fascinating to me, that mainstream nutritional advice just completely ostracizes certain groups of researchers because they're going against the main message that honestly the most money goes behind, not because it's the most correct or supported by evidence. So honestly, anytime that I read something, I immediately changed my lifestyle, because I couldn't keep reading that and being like, oh my gosh, this is connected to cancer and this is connected to cancer. And there's so many things connected to cancer. I want to make that clear. I specifically wanted to talk about food because I think that all of these new cancer cases in my generation specifically are due to our poor metabolic health, which is induced by, the average American diet.
Yeah, and I'm really curious, after you made those lifestyle changes and started eating a little differently, did you feel any immediate impact or difference?
100%. 100%. I think it's impacted my focus at school, my energy throughout the day. I think I had unsteady glucose levels for a little bit earlier on when I wasn't on this kind of diet. And I hate that we call it diet too, because then people think oh, diet, diets don't work, because they've haven't been on the correct diets. But like when you actually just start trying to focus on eating real food and even just get rid of processed foods, you see a change. Because then when you eat those foods again, they taste fake. Like they taste like cardboard. I think it was the other day my niece was over and she offered me like a candy or something. She's my niece, so I was like, oh, I'm not going to say no. So I tried to buy it and I could not eat it. It was so gross to me. And it's because I haven't had that in so long that I no longer feel like my taste buds don't recognize that as food.
Yeah, I feel absolutely the same way. That's happened to me as well because I generally stay away from processed food and I'm on a ketogenic diet as a treatment for a mental health condition that is now in remission.
Amazing. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you so much. What I love as well about you is you're obviously highly intelligent and we're able to put together this complex understanding and work these things out. But I think what you said about being a citizen scientist is also really critical. So many people feel intimidated. Like, who am I to take on to try to have an understanding of something so complex? And the idea that you as a high school student said, I want to solve cancer, and went to something, really challenged yourself to have an understanding of a complex issue, but then had a way to be an agent and actually create ways for people to engage and make a difference.
Yeah, I 100% think it's a simple message. And I think that, in fact, the idea of overcomplicating things in nutrition in general is one of the reasons why people don't get healthy, and almost like a strategy that these kinds of corrupt organizations employ to get people to not have a lifestyle change. And so I think that having the self-agency just to say like, hey, I have power over my health. I can choose my destiny and my future. These diseases aren't just going to hit me out of nowhere without any expectation, which there are some cases of that, of course, but the majority of them, we shouldn't be assuming that's the number one cause, just some kind of random roll of the dice. You actually do have so much power over your health. So understanding that and then getting excited to know that you can enact change and make yourself feel so good. I mean, Peter Attia in Outlive, when he talks about health span versus lifespan, that idea blew my mind because we all think, longevity, it looks like just a long life, just linearly. But actually, longevity, we should just want to be as healthy as we can for as long as possible, not just a long life. Because I've seen my grandparents or other people's grandparents where they live for a long time and they're miserable in the last 30 or so years of their lives because they're hit with all these chronic diseases and ailments that just make them not very happy. And so I think the idea of that is really cool. And if people feel that kind of ownership, then everyone has the capability to do what I did or look up things. I mean, I was just a curious kid who went on Safari, Google Scholar, and read as many PubMed and Science Direct articles as possible and started to just write about it and get feedback. Because I'm nowhere near being an expert in the field. I'm just here reading stuff daily and getting feedback from people as well. So I think that the mission of being a citizen scientist is a role that every single person has to kind of keep themselves healthy. It's almost like a job that we all have.
I am so excited that I had this opportunity to connect with you at the beginning of your journey because you've done so much, but I am sure that you have an incredibly bright future and you're going to make even more impact. And I just can't wait to see how this evolves. And I really believe you'll be part of a great movement, and to see that continue on for the next couple decades is going to be incredible. So I was wondering if we could just close with you sharing a little bit about what your plans are for the future.
Yeah, so I'm actually very excited because I recently committed to a brand new university in Austin, Texas called the University of Austin, Texas, and they are committed to the pursuit of truth, civil discourse, incredible seminars with deans who are super committed to us being challenged intellectually and learning a ton of things. And most of all, they value freedom of speech, which I was really hoping would be a value wherever I go to school, because unfortunately, I think it's kind of very, very rare in colleges now, where you're encouraged to speak whatever's on your mind and then just learn from it. Instead, censorship seems to be a thing that has been carried into classrooms. So I'm very excited about attending my school. And most of all, they're giving me the space to continue to pursue my project in the afternoons, because people kept saying to me, they're like, Grace, you shouldn't even go to college. Like, you should just keep doing what you're doing. And I was like, don't worry, I'm going to keep doing it. But I'm going to do it at this incredible school that's also going to still further my understanding in how to properly research things. It's going to give me a foundation in data science and analyzing all these different things. So I'm very excited about that. And I already shared I'm going to be building my app too. So that's kind of my main focus right now, and really getting the message out to my generation, because I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done and we need to start rallying the masses. So I'm on TikTok right now under Traveling Jeans _ at the end. And then of course you can find me on X at just Traveling Jeans.
Thank you so much for sharing with me today. And I couldn't be more excited to watch your journey continue to unfold.
Thank you for having me. It's been lovely.